This week, Joe Gross from Graylog is with us to discuss the less shiny side of incident response. Then in the enterprise security news, it's the week before RSA, and every marketing team everywhere is dumping their tastiest news, and we'll miss 90% of it because over 1,000 security vendors dumping all that at once. That's a lot to take in. That means we've got a ton of funding to discuss: acquisitions, companies coming out of stealth, new features, partnerships. That's not all, though, because Verizon also decided to release their DBIR the day or the week before RSA, and Mandiant's M Trends report just came out. And on top of all that, we've got some excellent essays for you. All that and even more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Are your security teams overwhelmed with nonstop alerts? Then say hello to SentinelOne's Purple AI, the world's most powerful generative AI security analyst, built to simplify and accelerate your SecOps. Purple AI is built on the most robust data lake in the market, enabling analysts to protect your organization at machine speed with natural language queries, threat hunting quick starts, smart response recommendations, and auto-saving investigation notebooks. See Purple AI in action at securityweekly.com/SentinelOne.
On the Security Weekly News, I try to scan and produce a quick look at some of the major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Aaron Leyland, Josh Marpet, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you'll look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and happy National Truffle Day. That would be the chocolate truffle, not the fungi. This is episode 360, recorded on Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the maven of marketing, the captain of content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How you doing, Katie?
I'm well. Happy Truffle Day to you. I think it's good Tyler's not here, because we all know how much he has a distaste for chocolate, which is just a major personality flaw.
It's I think it's officially a disorder now.
I do. But we have much more exciting things. Well, I don't know. More exciting things than chocolate. Maybe not, but there's a lot going on this week.
It is an exciting week. You are not going to RSA, but I'm going to RSA. Joe, are you going to RSA?
I am not. I was given a last minute mandate to be in Nashville instead of RSA, and I can't say that I'm upset about it.
No,
RSA is always great. It's great to connect with old people, but Nashville is
great. Actually, calmer Nashville. How many times would you hear that said?
Yeah. That's Nashville can get pretty crazy, especially around bridesmaid season. But yeah, have fun in Nashville. We'll miss you in San Francisco, or we'll be too busy to notice who wasn't there. Right? It's going to be madness. 40,000 plus people. All right, a few announcements here, and we'll get right into the interview. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA conference pass. If you haven't bought it yet, I don't know what you're doing. It's next week. If you don't have a place to stay, find some friends. There's maybe some Airbnbs left. So RSA conference goes Monday to Friday next week in San Francisco, but you can also do it on demand. They're still doing that after the pandemic. They haven't stopped doing a virtual component there, so maybe you save $100 on your pass for that. To use our discount code, you can go to securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 54USecWeekly. And we hope to see you there if you're going. If you need a ticket at the last minute, we got you. And on the evening of Monday, May 6, 2024, the first day of RSA, W2 Communications and Cyber Risk Alliance are bringing cyber tacos back to San Francisco. If eating free tacos, sipping on margaritas, and mingling with cyber professionals from all over the world sounds good to you, make sure to register to secure your spot. Visit securityweekly.com/cyber tacos to RSVP today. All right, and this interview is sponsored by Greylock, and today we're talking about preparation, the less shiny side of incident response. And we've got Joe Gross with us today. He's the Vice President of Customer Solutions at Greylog and also manages Greylog Open, a large interactive online community dedicated to IT and security knowledge sharing. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Excited to dive into my actual favorite part of the TDIR journey, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah. So really preparation's your favorite part?
I mean, 100%. Like at heart, I'm the dungeon master at heart, right? Like I like to set
Oh
everything
yeah.
up. I like to know what's going to happen and kind of get everybody, set my traps and get everybody ready for the exciting adventure ahead. So,
Wait,
yeah,
we are talking about the defense side here, right? Like
100%, 100% we are.
yeah, I mean, you absolutely can set traps for attackers. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Deception is a really cool market. I highly recommend you go check it out and set some honeypots and honey tokens all over the place.
without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I like you describing it as like a DM because of course part of preparation you probably do want to do some tabletops. You do want to run through some scenarios to just do sanity checks, make sure that you've got all the stuff you need. What kind of stuff when you go through preparation? What are the some of the key things that you start with? Because there's we can go down the long tail of all the stuff you can do, but
Yeah.
for you, what are those kind of like the initial things and those core
Hmm.
key components to it that you
Hmm.
just cannot live without?
Yeah, I mean the first thing I'm looking at when I'm building just a cybersecurity plan in general, that
Mhm.
not even the incident response side is, what kind of budget am I working with? What kind of buy-in am I looking at from the organization as a whole? Kind of expertise do I have within my team and within my organization? Um, and do I know what my risks are or not? Like, where am I in that journey? Um, and being this is now the second sim vendor that I've worked for, and just those four questions, those four really basic questions, somewhere in there is where someone's getting tripped up in this journey, right? They're coming in and saying, I need to check this box. I need to be ready for this. I need to be able to stop the bad guys, but they haven't even talked to their CFO about, like, well, how much can I spend on these tools? They haven't assessed they haven't looked at their own team and been like, do I even have someone here that knows anything beyond, basic Windows troubleshooting and things like that. So I mean, don't even get me started on getting into, like, do you have the right data sources in your sim? Do you have the right tooling? Or do you have an incident response plan? Have you done a tabletop? Right? Those things are like, we're kind of seeing the highest end of of companies are doing those things, but so often, uh, many companies are just missing the basics.
Yeah, I might get you started because we do have
Please do.
we can go down some of those rabbit holes. So yeah,
Yeah.
while you're talking, it made me realize talking to the CFO, cyber insurance is
Hmm.
now a big piece of that preparation, right? Like your
100%.
insurer might say, "Hey, we're only going to reimburse you if you use one of the DFIR responders that's on our official list." Like
Hmm.
if the you want to hire Mandiant, but they're not on the list, tough luck. You're
Yeah.
not getting reimbursed for it. Like, go for it, but it's not coming out
Yep.
of your insurance policy.
Yeah, we're starting to see with cyber insurance that they're being so prescriptive all the way around, where
Oh,
it's,
really?
I mean, we've seen cyber policies that, if you are not up to date on the latest patches, and
Mhm.
their definition of that can be extraordinarily tight, or it can be kind of loose, right? So if you have a box that doesn't have the latest AV definitions or something like that, are you out of compliance with that insurance? Are you going to get reimbursed? And then, yeah, you get into, what vendors can you use, and how, as a vendor like Greylog, that's this small scrappy open source company, open source product, how do we get on that list, and how do we become a part of that to partner with you?
Mm.
um I think there's this commercialization that's happening to cybersecurity right now, uh, that is kind of driving the conversation in a lot of ways that I think I don't know that everyone's prepared for. Just like, hey, I have an incident, I'm going to call Mandiant because that's the name that I know, but only to find out 10 weeks later and $100,000, I'm not getting paid back for that. Right? These
So that brings up a really good question, a couple of questions for me, Joe, that could have significant impact on this whole process. So first of all, are you seeing in insurance policies specific vendors mentioned by name for certain areas?
Not necessarily specific vendors by name. We are starting to see things where there are really strict qualifications to what that is, right? So, at one point it was you need to have a sim, right? We're starting to see things where we need to have, a product that markets itself as a sim, or it is on the Gartner Magic Quadrant or something along those lines. And obviously those requirements change as you move up the line, and we can argue about whether or not the Magic Quadrant is a good definition of if you're a sim or not.
We could definitely argue about that.
I actually don't think we'd have much of an argument, but
probably not. Probably not. But we're starting to see just insurers are scared, right? Their business is risk, and cybersecurity is proving to be one of the riskiest endeavors that they have gone after. And so they're looking to not pay out as often as possible, right? Increase the shareholder wealth, and that's how they do that, is not paying out and doing smart things with that. So we're starting to see them becoming more and more prescriptive over time. Some not necessarily gotten to the point of vendor names, although DFIR I think they have been named there, but not quite in like the sim world and the EDR and those kind of things. Just still check boxes, and then lots of requirements. When was the last time you reviewed your rules? When was the last time you had someone examine the configurations, whatever?
So not to the point of saying company A, company X, company M, right, but once requirements start getting named out in insurance policies, it does certainly limit the vendors. Does that then mean that there's some, even minor, because things are going to change, as you said, is there some conflict of interest at some level where it becomes almost like a pay for play market, where if you're not playing by the rules of the insurance company, you're not going to get a payout in any situation? And does it also mean that when insurers do partner up with vendors, because we've seen that a little, that's a way to block out certain parts of the market and make it tougher for companies who, for whatever reason, maybe it's preference, maybe it's business requirements, maybe it's talent, they can't go with that quote preferred vendor that the insurance company uses?
Yes, 100%. I think, but there's a positive and negative side to that, right? So let's flip the conversation away from insurers, because that's easy to talk about good and bad. But then we look at like things like the federal government and the NSA, the FBI, Secret Service making recommendations. Until about 2022, 2023, they refused to make recommendations on tools, refused to make recommendations on vendors, anything like that. That policy has actually been reversed. And that they are starting to make recommendations on vendors and tools and things like that. And the reason they're doing that is because they were going into these organizations and they were finding that they had nothing, and they didn't know where to start. They didn't have the expertise, and they were, the first thing they would do is, Mr. Jim's law firm from Fuquay Varina, North Carolina, was calling Splunk, and they'd get ignored, right? Because you Google SIM, and what's the first link? It's Splunk every time. And so they've started making recommendations, and they're starting to push people in certain directions. And now that's not necessarily a pay to play, but now there's the question of, you have this federal agency making recommendations. How do I get on that list? How do I help them push us in the right direction. And then, and you've always kind of had that pay for play in like the Gartner, Forrester, the analyst world.
Sure.
That's always existed. But now in the cyber insurance world, I mean, it's another pay for play, but there's also a question mark of, do we have so little knowledge out there, like real cybersecurity knowledge out there and real understanding of risk, that this is something that may be necessary because of a lack of a concerted, like, federal global response to this, to the epidemic that is cyber attacks on small and medium businesses. We're not talking about large businesses. We're not talking about the Fortune 500. They have this
right. They already have
figured out. They've already got this wrapped up in a lot of ways. Now they don't have it wrapped up, but they have their plans. They have their insurance. That's a different conversation. But for the average organization, where else do you get this information from? Where else do you find someone? And so there's kind of this negative side for vendors, but there's a positive side for the customer. And so how do we rationalize that is a great question.
I imagine that's why MSSPs are doing so well, right? Because that's kind of the answer. And like, I have no idea what to do. I will just go hire these people and they'll get you set up with a SIM and an EDR tool and kind of hold your hand through it, right?
For sure. I think, the MSSP space is one that, they see swings all the time, and whether or not they're the right place to start and who to trust and things. I think the MSSP market has the same problems that the MSP market had, coming out of that space of, you get these really large professional, great MSSPs that are absolutely fantastic to work with, and they'll take care of you and they'll do everything that you need. And then you have the guy that worked at IBM for 25 years and is angry and decided he wants to go do his own thing, and he starts an MSSP. and so MSSPs are great, but how do you as the consumer know which one to trust? How do you vet them? And that is a place that cyber insurance is starting to weigh in. Right back to Gartner. Yeah. Is the guy down the street the best option for you, or should you go with the large scale organization that, do you go with Arctic Wolf, or do you go with, the company that I work for called the Tech?
ex IBMer.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Katie. I think I cut you off. You were going to ask another question. Sound like
no. I was just going to comment, and Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong or redirect the question. And it's so there are some recommendations, and some people might feel that that's crossing a line a little bit, but does this have the effect on those smaller and medium businesses that they're being pushed, whether willingly or not, toward more research, more information gathering, more skill building? Even if they're outsourcing, there's still a responsibility. So is that happening, or are they still trying to dump it off? Because I would think the former would have a positive effect on cybersecurity in the industry overall.
100%. I think we're starting to see people get to a place where they are having to do more research. They're having to do more understanding. And if they aren't doing that, they're opening themselves up for lawsuits and, and other compliance issues, whether that's with actual compliance frameworks or just with regional, regional regulations and things like that. There's one of my favorite topics in cybersecurity is the legal burden called the burden of reasonable care, which is more than just a cybersecurity topic, but it's a legal burden. And it's in every compliance framework you see out there, every cybersecurity law. There's a portion there that says, the company will take reasonable care of their customers' data. And that reasonable care is how they encompass all of this into it, right? And that reasonable care burden scales based upon how large of an organization you are, how many resources you have, how many people you have, those kinds of things. One of the interesting tenets of it is that once you know about a risk, you're responsible for that risk. And so now that we have these small businesses that are learning about ransomware, learning about phishing, learning about these things, they're now suddenly more responsible than they've ever been. And we're starting to see courts starting to side with that, right? We're starting to see courts that are taking organizations and saying, yeah, you were negligent with this data and you should have known about this. It's on CNN every single day. How did you not know about this? um, and so, so I think, yes, we're seeing people being forced to do more research and hire more expertise internally as well as looking externally for that. But and if they're not, I think we're starting to see the legal system catch up with this idea that someone needs to be responsible for it, and ultimately it's going to be the organization that holds the data.
Yeah. All right. So next, I kind of wanted to move back to the incident response plan because
Yeah.
I've written a lot of incident response plans.
Mm-hmm.
I've written a lot, both for the company that I worked for and for other organizations as a consultant. And having that experience, I know, sometimes that IR plan, like the driver for it's a checkbox, and the only thing that Word document or PDF will ever get used for is uploading in a form that says, show us your IR plan, to
Yeah.
make an auditor happy or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, like I bet if I put a honey token in that Word document, in some cases it would never fire. Nobody would ever open it.
Right.
And even in well-intentioned cases where they put together a plan, like they circulate it, they redline it, they
Mm-hmm.
add stuff that's missing, it'll still get dusty. It'll
Mm-hmm.
still get lost somewhere in SharePoint. So what are your suggestions on making that plan into something that's actionable, that can get pulled out when an incident occurred, or at least the parts of it that matter,
Yeah.
for those different stages of incident response. It can be useful. It can actually guide people's actions. Or is it more about practicing? Is it more
Mm-hmm.
about using that for practice? And then you practice so much, you don't need to open the Word doc during the incident. You already know what to do.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the last part there. I think a policy, a document is only as good as how well you're going to utilize it, right? I mean, I've seen some beautifully written incident response plans that never worked, never once. And I've seen
Fantasy.
some right, and I've seen some incident response plans that were essentially a call tree, and they worked wonderfully. And so it's not about the document. I want to change one of the words you use. You use this word practice, and I think that's part of it. But I prefer to use the word play around around cybersecurity and around incident response, because one of the best ways that we learn as humans is by doing and by enjoying what we're doing. And so, one of the things I do is try to make tabletop exercises fun, right? We do tabletop I do tabletop exercises internally with my team on a regular basis just to keep our skills sharp working with customers. And you'd be surprised by how much creating some ridiculous scenario and having funny names and having memorable things improves our ability to actually work the plan and find the edges of it, as opposed to we're going to do this really serious and we're going to do this by the book and we're going to make it as much like real life as possible. You want it to be realistic, but everyone knows when the actual thing happens, we're all going to be serious and we're all going to take this seriously. But we want to fall to the level of our training, and a lot of times training is best done in a place that is accepting of failure. It is fun, it's engaging, it's something that trials you and pushes you. And so, I like to look at how we make these things better as, how can I challenge you while you are engaged in having fun? I don't want to challenge you so much that you turn off, but I want to give you the ability to explore inside of a cohesive world. For example, our primary company that we work with is a Joe Schmo's Outdoor and Computer Parts. They have everything you need for computing in the rain. is their tagline.
That's
and
great.
they and they have all sorts of wacky things about them that make that network difficult to deal with. And so when you're looking to improve your incident response, obviously you want to practice on your own network, but also take time to kind of deviate from that and just work on the brain exercise of that plan and of the execution where it makes sense.
So I think you led us to our next challenge, and that's like a good DM is hard to find. You know,
Yeah.
like a lot of people are not natural dungeon masters. They can't come up with good scenarios.
Mhm.
You know, they're going to need some help there. They're at least going to need some pointers to places where they can find maybe tabletop suggestions,
Yep.
some kind of in the same thing in the tabletop gaming world, right?
Mhm.
Like not everybody can come up with something, just not everybody's a writer, not
Sure.
everybody's has that level of imagination. So, would you suggest that, obviously this is something you can hire a consulting firm to come in and
Yep.
do? You can hire maybe Joe to come in and run one for you. But what would you suggest for maybe people who want to DIY internally? Are there resources out there, like
Yeah.
scenarios you can go find for doing cybersecurity tabletops?
Yeah, so my favorite usage of this is Backdoors and Breaches
Oh,
by
okay. Black Hills
Black
InfoSec.
Hills InfoSec.
Mhm.
I have the deck right here on my desk. It sits right here all the time. And they have an online version too. And so it doesn't necessarily take care of like the world around it, right? And it doesn't always do great at that, but it will give you the scenario and give you like the major plot points that you need to hit, right? So at that point, you don't need to necessarily be the expert DM. You have everything kind of laid out for you just based upon the rules of the game, right? Um, from there, I would invite you to write, try and write something interesting, and see where you can go with it. But I think starting with something that's structured like that, this is the only one that I feel confident shouting out. But there are others out there that are also very similar. And there are also companies out there that are focused on in-person cyber education. There's a company out of Canada that the name totally eludes me at this moment, and that's what they do. I mean, they have a professor that this is his side gig, and he comes and he runs these in-person cyber games, and he's
Mhm.
super funny and does them and will follow real world examples or follow your incident response plan, whatever it makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it's not necessarily about you needing to be the DM. It's about you being willing to kind of look outside of your box, your quiver of arrows, we'll call it, to find the resources that are available to you. Consultants can be great. Consultants can also be stuffy. Kind of finding what jives
Right.
with your team, and knowing your team, I think is another piece of that, right? Just knowing what is your team going to respond to. Are they a bunch of
Mhm.
D&D nerds that are going to really get into
Yeah.
the
You do
the
that.
dice rolling aspect of this, right? Or are they, are we pulling them together and they're a bunch of introverts and the last thing they want to do is talk to each other? That changes the way that you might approach something like this, and there are resources out there for kind of every iteration of it.
So you remarked on something I think worth calling out there, that this doesn't have to be a fantasy. It doesn't have to be Joe Schmo's computer parts.
Right.
Um, do tabletop folks often use real incidents and
Oh
kind of
yeah,
run through those? Like, what if their incident, that we read about, that we have
Mhm.
details about, happened to us? How would we do in that scenario? Is that something that people do?
For sure. I think I think there's a healthy balance of both, right? I think there's a time and place to just practice and just get the muscles right. I think early on when you are building these things out, the less connected to reality you can make them, the easier it is to learn the concepts of the plan, the easier it is to learn the concepts of thinking in terms of risk, remembering to notify the media, all of that kind of stuff, right? Like there's all these like real world things that need to happen, and sometimes it's easier to remember those things when the pressure is off. And so you can implement this kind of you can implement a kind of buffer between them by making up something, right? The but as you get deeper into this stuff, taking real world examples and determining how you would deal with that, it just hones your skills, right? So now you have an experienced team, you have a group of people that they know the incident response plan, they know how to deal with this. And now we're going to take, there was a Trello incident that happened a couple months ago where their API they dumped, I don't know, it was 20 million records or something like that. We're going to take that and we're going to now think about how would we respond if this worked this happened in our same environment. And that just now takes the fantasy world that you built and practiced on and now applies it to reality, right? It's it's kind of like there was a TikTok. Actually, let's just be honest. I'm a cybersecurity professional on TikTok. Just is how what it is. But there was.
Sorry, this interview is over. No more for you.
Yeah, we can. That's fine. It's cool. I understand. But there was one that talked about that how everyone complains that they've never used algebra in their real life, right? Okay. And you spend all of this time learning all of these things and you never use them, only to realize that you use algebra every single day. Your brain has just learned how to change things, how to change 5 apples is equal to 5 times X is equal to $10, right? You've been able to figure out how to make that work for you. And I think it's kind of the same way, right? We're practicing. And so we practice with fun stuff, right? Which is exactly what my 6-year-old is doing in first grade. We practice with. Go ahead.
That goes back to your point. Like we don't realize it's algebra because we don't think about it with that label, right? 100%. So it goes back to your point about calling it play, not practice. Like practice is something you don't look forward to, that you don't retain as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I like that you made that distinction because that's why we don't think of it as algebra, right? Like that's why we retain stuff better when it's enjoyable.
Yeah. My 6-year-old hates going to soccer practice, but he loves playing a soccer game. And it's the same application, right? Every cybersecurity person loves it when it's their time to shine, right? When the incident's going down and you're diving in and your manager has now ordered pizza because you're going to be here longer than dinner time. Everyone's actually excited about that moment, right? Yeah. But no one wants to sit and do a tabletop game. No one wants to sit and do these things, right? No one wants to do the practice part of it. And so can you make it fun? And then can you make it applicable over time, right?
Yeah,
that's the balance.
How much do simulation emulation tools come into that? I know they are sometimes not part of IR plans. In your experience, yay, nay, sometimes it depends?
Yeah, are you referring to attack simulation tools specifically?
Yeah.
Purple teaming is definitely a part of that world. Where I find that to be most helpful is actually on the threat detection preparation side of things and less on the incident response side of things. Incident response, and this is, I think, one of the things people get wrong about incident response is it's so not technical. There are technical aspects to it, but it's like diving into the logs and reading them, right? Which is not massively technical, right? But you need something you do. But there's so much people stuff. There's so much legal stuff. There's so much media stuff. There's so much executive and SEC stuff. There's so much other stuff that has to happen. I'm just going to keep saying the word stuff till it doesn't sound like a real word anymore. And we're gonna there's so much else that you need to handle that those things can be helpful in setting up the scenario, right? So now you want to take this theoretical scenario and you want to try and make it as realistic as possible. Now I'm going to use a threat emulation. We're going to run it through the sim and we're going to actually try to walk this backwards. Most threat emulation, though, to be completely honest, is kind of lacking in depth to really be super great at running an incident response plan against, right? It's okay, someone ran Mimikatz. That's great. What else happened? How did that get there? Yeah. Right? Where did this come from?
You need context, right?
100% you need context. Context is everything, right?
Yeah.
So I think threat emulation plays a role. I personally think it sits a little bit more on the threat detection side than the incident response side. But it certainly can be something you can use to set the scenario without a doubt.
So you actually touched on exactly where I wanted to go next, which was so far, like, sometimes talking about tabletops, everybody's imagining in their mind this is something that the security team does,
Mhm.
something that only the security people do together. But if you've ever been through an incident, you know that a lot of other people have to be involved in that and will be involved in that. And one of my biggest soapboxes is that handling a breach, like anybody can have a breach, but
Mhm.
it's not the fact that you had a breach that really, makes you come out of it looking good or looking bad. It's how you handle it.
Yep.
Like companies who are not transparent about it, they don't notify people in time. They're not timely with updates about it. They're not good at communication. They don't handle the communication bit well. They either pretend like nothing happened, like we see the folks try to sweep it under the rug,
Yeah.
nothing to see here, which never works. And then the folks who just try and restrict sharing information, it just ends up hurting the people who are
Yeah.
affected by the breach. So let's maybe dive into that a bit, at what point, I guess maybe you have tabletops that are just a security team. At what point
Sure.
do you pull in legal? Do you pull in the PR folks? Do you, and even when you're having a breach,
Mhm.
how do you decide at what point does the CEO need to know?
Yeah.
And how often do you need to give them updates and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. I think so. I think there's an important distinction here, which is distinction between an incident and a breach, which I think we often use when we're talking about the stuff in media as kind of interchangeable. But the truth is, legally they're not, right? And I know you guys are
Yeah.
familiar with that, but legally
Breach is
speaking,
incident with consequences, right?
right, right. A breach has a legal definition in every
Yeah.
state, in every country. It has a legal definition of what that means, and and so the incident is everything that happens up until you've determined it's a breach, right? And then you move from there. I think, obviously by the time it's a breach, everyone should be notified, everyone should be brought in. How you operate ahead of that is somewhat up to what your organization's risk appetite is. What is your organization's willingness to move on the fly, right? Like, I can't tell any organization what they should do in an incident. I have ideas. I have or wait, let me change. Let me phrase it. I can't tell any organization what to do in an incident. I can tell them what I think they should do, what their recommendations are, what the best practices are. But getting them to actually do what I'm asking all comes down to their risk profile. Comes down to what they want to do. So as far as like when to notify people, I think that's a question mark that lives within the organization. I would recommend somewhere between somewhere after you recognize this thing is real and before you've determined it's an actual breach, people should be notified. But as far as the games that we're playing, I'm a huge advocate for the fact that as a cybersecurity team, to be I don't want to be the no hammer department, right? and that's what security has been for a long time. Was I'm gonna sit here in my ivory tower, and you're gonna send a request through, and I'm gonna hit it with my no hammer, and you're not gonna be allowed to do it. I want to be an enabler of business, and part of being an enabler of business is building trust and building relationships across the organization. And so I'm an advocate for as often as possible. As often as you can get these people in the room, bring them in,
Yeah.
right? You can't always get the CEO once a quarter or once a month or however often you want to run an incident response tabletop. You can't get that person, but you can get a stand-in for that person. You can get a vice president or someone like that that can play that role. You can also just include the CEO when it's necessary, and you the game master, you the organizer of it, can play that role for a period of time. But if you have a legal counsel in charge of cybersecurity, you're at an organization that's large enough for that, bring them in, have them there every time. Why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you want that voice teaching the actual the defender sitting in the SOC what to do and what not to do? because there
And it
are
seems like it would be as often as it's in the news, it seems like that would be easier now than it might have been 10 years ago.
oh, for sure. For sure, it's easier now than it was 10 years ago. Here's what's actually easier. It's not any easier to get the individuals in the room. It's easier to get their
Okay.
boss to tell them to come to the room, right? It's easier to go up the chain to get, the board to tell the CEO that they need to sit in this room every time. It's easier to get, the general counsel to tell the cybersecurity lawyer they need to sit in this room. Everyone is calendar defensive today still, right? But
Yeah.
going up the chain is easier than it's ever been.
That sounds like a product to me, Calendar Defender. I need to install Calendar
It
Defender.
just blocks meetings.
I
Deletes
could have
them
used
left and
that
right.
2 months ago when RSA requests started. Calendar Defender. So you mentioned something there that I think is a really important point. PCI requires an IR test once a year,
Mhm.
right? An annual incident response test. Clearly, that's on the lighter side of what you'd
Yep.
probably want to do if you
Yep.
want to be good at responding to incidents.
For sure.
Obviously it's gonna be this might be an it depends question,
Yeah.
but what do you usually you said it as much as you possibly can, but more practically, like how often do you see companies doing this? And
Yeah.
what do you see as effective in terms of frequency?
I see companies running full tabletops, companies that are good at this, at least quarterly.
Okay.
And those that are running it at least quarterly, those that are running it quarterly tend to be the ones with the mature teams, right?
Okay.
So they know how this operates, they know what this does, they know the way to bring this together. I think if you are new to this, you are new to incident response, you're new to building a plan and building a team to do that. And that incident response team, I don't mean the actual incident responders. I mean like the building the cross functional team. Um, I think over a period of time, you should be meeting literally as frequently as possible. Like I've seen
Mhm.
people take,
So
hey,
more frequently if you're not
more
as good
frequently.
as at it. Yeah.
I
Okay.
would I would 100% agree. And you get up into organizations like, that are doing, kind of at the high end of cybersecurity, like Target and JP Morgan Chase and things like that. And they're running these things constantly, right? They're running tabletops all the time and they're running constant, red team scenarios and things like that. But if you're a medium-sized business, it's not unreasonable for you to run these once a month for 6 months
Yeah.
and run them with your partners and run them with those things. It's not unreasonable for you to say, every 2 weeks for the first, for 6 weeks, we're going to run these, and just to get everyone in understanding, right? You are trying to impart decades of risk understanding to people that
Yeah.
know nothing about risk, right? Or people that, a CEO knows a lot about risk, but they have no understanding to this kind of risk. And so you're trying to draw lines for them in their brain between what they understand of risk and cybersecurity. And that's a difficult concept to do without repetition, without, kind of looking into how the mind learns and getting back into that play conversation and those things. And so, um, my I like to take it back to my 6-year-old son because I think it is the most accurate representation of how people learn. He
Yeah.
is great at Mario when he's been playing 5 days in a row,
Mhm.
right? But how often do I let him play 5 days in a row? Not that often. So he loses things every time that he goes longer stretches of time without that. And so over time he's getting better. But would he be better if he could play 5 days if he could play every day for an hour a day? He'd be monumentally better.
Yeah.
Mario, luckily, is not a life skill. Well, actually, I'm going to argue that. I'm going to take that back because I don't know that I agree with my own statement. But
There's an argument to be made there.
but but it's the same thing in cybersecurity, right? We have to practice. We have to continue at this,
Keep
and
skills sharp.
yeah, you gotta the the phrase of you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training is 100% accurate in this as well,
Oh,
right?
interesting. I have not heard that before. That's good.
Yeah, it's
Y yeah, you
go
have a
ahead.
source for it?
What's I
Yeah,
no,
it's an
I
old like military train. It's an old like I think it's a Navy SEAL term or something like that. I don't know. I'm going to attribute it to them, even if it's not. So
Okay.
go with that.
Sorry, go ahead, Katie.
With all of this being said,
Yeah.
what are your best recommendations on how to structure these tabletop exercises? Should they be full days, half days,
Yeah.
an hour?
Good
Should
question.
they start at a certain place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I am a firm believer in, as you probably can tell, I'm a firm believer in practicing often, and doing things as often as you can. And so what I would say is, as you are in smaller groups and things, you can play this in an hour. You can do this in an hour. That's one of the reasons I love Backdoors and Breaches is you can fully get through a Backdoors and Breaches game in 45 minutes to an hour without question. Um, as as you expand your ability to operate within these things, as you get better at those kinds of more controlled versions, I think it does warrant a half day or a full day, a few times a year, right? I think that's where we look at when we're doing quarterly, we're talking about a day or maybe potentially multiple days, depending on how large your organization is and those things. But if you're in that, let's say 1,000 to 10,000 seats, it's not unreasonable for you to take a day away every quarter to just spend on this, and this is what you're doing. If you're below that, half a day, certainly 4 hours. I mean, it's very difficult to really get all the way through these scenarios without that. And as far as where to start in these scenarios, um, I personally, there are, I think there are times to move that scenario around. There are times to say, hey, it's already gotten out to the media. What do we do with it to control it? Right. There's times for the extreme cases. Right. But then I think also you're just doing regular planning and you're just kind of, working through this. Let's start at the point where we know this thing is an incident, right? Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with some facts and go from there. And let's not try to throw too many wrenches in it until we get used to it and we get call, and people are calm and people handle it well. Then let's throw wrenches into it. I mean, I think many of us have been the defenders in a breach that was first reported on and then detected.
Right.
And
Was
it's not a
detected.
fun,
Yeah.
it is not a fun place to be. And it's something we want to train for, but is that, if you're just at the beginning of your journey in this, is that where you want to start? Probably not.
Yeah.
Let's just get the fundamentals down.
So I just want to wrap with it. We don't have a ton of time left. So just if we could wrap with this quick question, and I apologize for making you answer it quickly, but back when I did investigations, a lot of them, wouldn't have that sense of urgency to them. A lot of them weren't internal. They're more like HR type things. It was a different world. I was a chief incident handler in than what we have today.
Yeah.
But yeah, now in the day of like month long IR responses and recovery and stuff like that, should it be part of your plan and your preparation on how you're going to augment staff, like keep them from getting burned out, feed them, sleep them? How are you going to rotate people so that you don't just, uh, you know, get everybody to quit the whole industry by the time it's done?
I think there's a little bit, the short answer is probably is more than likely yes. There's also kind of another angle to it where, and I'm going to answer this quickly, I promise, where, sometimes the month long is a month of people working 40 to 50 hours, right? It's just because the actual response to the attack has happened and is done and is contained and those things in the first 48 hours, 72 hours, something like that. In that time, you got to feed them, you got to sleep them, you got to rotate shifts, you got to do all that, until you're contained and you're positive, right? The next month or so, a lot of that is forensic analysis. It's taking the time to, really fully understand how it got in. Are you fully cleaned out? That kind of stuff. So it's stop the bleed. Let's stop the bleed. And then, let's figure out the where we go from there. Stopping the bleed, that, do whatever you can.
Assuming you're not on to the next incident response in the middle of the
Exactly.
response for the
Yeah.
last one, right?
Yeah, hopefully not, but maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Oh man, Joe, this has been great. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I think this is going to be a great one to recommend to people. To just kind of, if somebody's just getting into incident response or just coming onto a team and they've got to build an IR plan or something like that. I think we put together some pretty good guidance here. So thank you for that. Thank you
Yeah,
for
of course.
joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been super fun. Like I said, this is one of my favorite topics in cybersecurity, so always glad to talk about it.
And make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Graylog to learn more. And stay tuned. We'll be back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.